$9 bought a ranch that was broken, but it was not the money that carried them there. It was something heavier and stronger. Hope. A widowed father, his fragile little girl, and a German shepherd whose loyalty had never wavered stood at the edge of ruin, staring across fields where the wind whispered like restless ghosts. The land was scarred, the fences torn, the buildings weary. Yet beneath all of it, something pulsed, something hidden. The ranch carried secrets, enemies still lurking in the soil, and memories that had no desire to remain buried. What they would find here was not only betrayal, but a battle for justice, for family, and for a home waiting to be born again. Before we step into their story, make sure you subscribe and tap the bell so you never miss a tale that can break your heart and stitch it back together in the same breath. The long highway into Wyoming stretched empty beneath a sky that looked endless, a sky that had forgotten the sound of busy lives. Ethan Ward's hands gripped the steering wheel of the rust-bitten pickup as though it was the only solid thing left in the world. His shoulders were squared, his jaw set with the quiet strength of a man who had already endured more than his share of blows, yet refused to let them bend him. At 38 years old, lean and angular, his body carried the marks of exhaustion, but also the hard edge of survival. His face was lined not by age alone, but by nights without sleep and years of work that left nothing behind. Still, in his gray-blue eyes, tired as they were, lived a small ember of stubborn hope that refused to die. His denim jacket, once tough and new, now hung loose with frayed cuffs. His boots, scarred and cracked, carried the stories of years of labor he could no longer claim. Beside him, on the passenger seat, sat Chloe, his 10-year-old daughter. A knitted red cap, once her mother's favorite, was pulled down tight over her ears. The wool was faded from time, but it clung to her like comfort. Her light brown hair, messy from the long drive, slipped out from beneath the cap, framing her thin face. In her lap, she held her small sketchbook, its pages filled with her fragile pencil dreams. As the truck droned down the endless highway, she turned to a fresh page and began sketching again. This time, a house appeared beneath her. Pencil, one with wide steps leading to a porch, windows that glowed with light, and a garden circled by roses. Her hand moved fast, almost desperate, as if drawing the picture could summon it into the world and keep it safe. Between them, braced firmly with forepaws planted on the dashboard, stood Ranger, the German shepherd who had been their shadow through every storm. His coat, sable streaked with gray around the muzzle, gave him an almost wise appearance, as though he knew far more than he let on. His amber eyes swept the horizon with constant focus, ears twitching at every distant rustle of wind or bird. At 6 years old, Ranger carried himself not like a pet, but like a seasoned guardian, deliberate and calm. Every so often he turned his head, pressing his nose against Chloe's arm as if to remind her that he was there, that he would not let harm touch her. "Are we close?" Chloe asked quietly without looking up from her sketch. "Almost," Ethan replied, his voice rough but steady. "Another mile, maybe 2. You'll see the sign soon enough." Chloe finally looked up, her brown eyes full of cautious hope. "Do you think it will look like this?" she asked, holding up her drawing of the smiling home. Ethan glanced at it and allowed himself a small smile, faint but real. "It'll look like it needs us," he said, "and we'll make it ours." The hay sign came into view at last, a crooked plank nailed to a gatepost. Dead Crow Ranch. The paint had cracked and weathered, the black crow on it faded to ghost gray, its wings chipped and broken by time. Beyond the sign, the valley opened wide, framed by cottonwood trees whose branches swayed like watchers. Broken. Fences zigzagged through tall grass, and at the center lay the ranch itself. The barn sagged like a giant too tired to rise. The milking parlor stretched low and empty, its windows dark. The farmhouse stood with paint peeled down to bare wood, weary but still upright. Years ago, this had been one of the grandest dairies in the state. But then the cattle disease came. Families left, workers scattered, and the land was abandoned, leaving nothing but ghosts of milk and labor behind. Ethan pulled the truck into the yard. The engine coughed and then died, leaving behind only silence. Ranger leapt down first, his paws crunching gravel as he landed. He froze, body rigid, scanning the land. His ears pricked, his nose tested the air, and his amber eyes stayed sharp. Chloe climbed out next, hugging her sketchbook tight. The cold air stung her nose, full of sagebrush and the faint bitter smell of rust. "It's huge," Chloe whispered, staring wide-eyed at the ruined property. "Big enough for a new start," Ethan answered, though his chest felt tight with unease. He had bought the land at a county auction, $9, one bid. Nobody else had wanted it. It was all he had left. He still wasn't sure if he had bought salvation or a curse. Together, they walked toward the farmhouse. The porch sagged and moaned beneath the weight of years. Chloe set one foot on the steps. They groaned under her small weight, and before Ethan could warn her, the board snapped with a sharp crack. She stumbled forward, arms flailing. In an instant, Ranger slammed his shoulder against her legs, holding her steady. Ethan lunged forward, gripping her jacket and yanking her back before the step gave way completely. The wood broke with a splintering crash, leaving a jagged hole in the porch. Chloe clutched her sketchbook to her chest, eyes wide and breath shallow. "That was close," Ethan said, kneeling to steady her shoulders. His voice was calm, but his heart hammered. "You need to be careful. These old places don't forgive mistakes." She nodded quickly, cheeks flushed with fright. Ranger sat down beside her, his amber eyes fixed on Ethan as if delivering a report of his success. Ethan reached out and rubbed the dog's ears. "Good boy," he murmured. "You keep her safe." Inside, the air smelled of dust and long dead wood. Light filtered through broken windows, striping the floors with pale patterns. Faded wallpaper peeled in curling strips, its bluebells ghost-like. In the kitchen, a porcelain sink sat chipped beneath a window that looked out at the cottonwoods. A rusted stove stood fixed in its corner, like an old soldier who refused to leave. Ethan moved from room to room slowly, his builder's eye measuring the beams, the floors, the walls. He saw the damage, but he also saw what could be saved. Chloe wandered with her sketchbook, capturing the way light fell through the cracks in the roof or the shape of the leaning staircase. In the kitchen, she pressed her drawing of the smiling house against the wall with a strip of tape scavenged from Ethan's toolbox. "Now it feels like ours," she whispered. They tested the well together. Ethan pumped the handle until rust water spat out, then slowly gave way to a thin, clean stream. He cupped it in his palm, tasted, and nodded. "We'll boil it, filter it, it'll do." Chloe laughed, catching water in her small hands and letting it slip through her fingers like treasure. Ranger lapped at it happily, tail sweeping the dirt. By late afternoon, they sat on the porch with sandwiches from the cooler. The wind had stilled, and the fields lay quiet. Chloe sketched again, this time Ranger, armored like a knight with a crooked crown. She giggled when the shepherd nudged her hand, as if approving the drawing. Ethan leaned back against the porch post, the sight of them softening something inside him that had been hard for too long. As the sun dropped, they spread out their sleeping bags in the front room. Chloe curled against Ranger, her sketchbook resting across her chest. Ethan stood at the window, watching the last of the light fade over the barn. $9 had bought them this land, but what it truly gave them was harder to measure. The chance to fight for something, to belong again. He lay down at last beside his daughter and the dog, listening as their breaths fell into rhythm with his own. For the first time in months, he felt almost at peace. The first night at Dead Crow Ranch did not yield the peace Ethan had hoped for. The sleeping bags had been unrolled in the front room of the farmhouse and the lantern extinguished, leaving only the pale spill of moonlight through cracked windows. Chloe slept curled tightly against Ranger, her sketchbook fallen open across her chest. Ethan lay nearby, staring up at the ceiling beams, counting the slow groans of the old wood. For a moment, the silence felt almost gentle. Then Ranger stiffened. The dog's ears pricked forward, his body snapping from rest to full alert. A growl rolled deep in his chest. Ethan sat up at once. Ranger stood rigid, the hackles along his spine rising sharp, his amber eyes fixed on the dark window facing the cottonwood grove at the edge of the property. "Easy, boy," Ethan whispered, though his hand slid to the flashlight at his side. Ranger did not settle. His growl rose into a volley of sharp, cutting barks that shattered the fragile stillness. Chloe startled awake, clutching her sketchbook as though it were a shield. Her eyes followed Ranger's gaze. "Daddy, look," she whispered. Out beyond the trees, just for a breath, a flash of white cut the dark. A flashlight beam. Jagged, searching. It flickered, swayed, then vanished among the shadows. Ethan moved quickly to the window, careful not to show his outline. His eyes scanned the grove. Branches shifted in the night wind, but the light was gone. Only Ranger barked on until Ethan pressed a firm hand to his collar and hushed him. The dog fell silent, but his eyes stayed fixed on the trees, his body tense as wire. Chloe crept to Ethan's side. Her voice shook. "Someone's out there." Ethan placed a steadying hand on her shoulder. Could be a hunter passing through. Could be nothing. But even as he spoke, the words felt hollow. Hunters didn't wander this close to abandoned ranch houses in the middle of the night. When Chloe finally drifted back to uneasy sleep, Ranger lay planted at the door like a silent sentry. Ethan stayed awake for hours, his mind circling with questions. He had bought this land to escape chaos, not invite it. Yet the shadows in the grove suggested he had stepped into someone else's story. Morning broke brittle and cold. The sky washed pale. Ethan brewed weak coffee on a camp stove balanced on the counter. Chloe chewed bread in silence, her eyes never leaving the window that faced the grove. Ranger paced near the doorframe, nose twitching, body restless, as though waiting for the night intruder to return. "I'll check the place out," Ethan said, pulling on his jacket. "Stay close to the house." They walked together toward the old well at the yard's edge, the same one Ethan had tested the day before. Frost crusted the wooden boards that covered it. As Ethan approached, something caught his eye. Impressions in the dirt nearby. He crouched, brushing aside dry leaves. The shape beneath was clear. A footprint, small, too small for any grown man. Chloe crouched beside him, eyes wide. "That's a kid's shoe, isn't it?" Ethan didn't answer immediately. The print was shallow but clear, rounded edges, narrow heel. A child had been near their well, not more than a night ago. He rose slowly, his jaw tightening. "Could be old," he muttered, though the sharpness of the edges told him otherwise. Chloe's eyes shone not with fear, but with curiosity. "Maybe they live nearby. Maybe they're hungry." Ethan shook his head, scanning the tree-line. "Or maybe someone doesn't want us here." Back at the farmhouse, Ethan turned his focus to work. If there were strangers lurking, he would deal with them later. For now, his daughter needed water, food, and a sense that this place could hold them. The old water pump stood beside the barn, its iron handle stiff with rust. He set his tools on the ground and began the tedious process of coaxing life back into the machine. Every movement was slow and stubborn. Bolts clung to their rust as though welded. His wrench slipped, knuckles splitting against the cold metal. He hissed but pressed on. Chloe watched from the steps, hugging her sketchbook, Ranger sitting upright beside her. "Is it broken forever?" she called. "Nothing's forever," Ethan grunted, tightening another bolt. "Just takes more work than it should." Hours passed, the pump groaning in protest. Finally, a thin trickle of water coughed out. Brown at first, then clearer. Ethan wiped his forehead, satisfied. Chloe clapped, her laughter breaking the heavy morning. "See? It's alive," Ethan said, forcing a smile. Later, while Ethan tested the filter system he had rigged, Chloe wandered to the porch. She carried the small loaf of bread they had brought from the truck. Breaking off a few pieces, she set them carefully along the edge of the step. Ranger tilted his head, watching her intently. "Shh," she whispered to him. "If they're hungry, maybe they'll come back. Maybe they'll see we're not mean." Her act was quiet, deliberate, and secret. She didn't tell her father. Deep down, she knew Ethan would worry, but Chloe's heart leaned toward the possibility that whoever had left that footprint was not a threat, but another soul in need like them. By dusk, the pump was working just enough to fill 2 buckets. Ethan carried them into the kitchen, shoulders aching, hands raw. Chloe showed him her newest sketch, a figure at the edge of the woods holding a lantern with a ranger drawn large and bright in the foreground like a guardian. "You shouldn't waste paper on shadows," Ethan said softly. But his eyes lingered on the page. That night, as darkness crept once again over the ranch, Ethan found himself standing at the porch steps. Ranger pressed against his leg. The dog's ears swiveled toward the cottonwood grove. The trees loomed dark, hiding secrets. Ethan thought of the small footprint near the well and Chloe's secret wish for the stranger to reveal themselves. He tightened his jacket, a chill creeping into his bones. The ranch was theirs now, but clearly they were not alone. The morning after the strange barking and the glimmer of light, Ethan tried to bury his worries and work. He stacked the boards. He had pried from the porch, making neat piles in the yard, and muttered about replacing them before another accident. Chloe, however, could not forget the footprint near the well or the whisper of a flashlight in the dark. Her curiosity simmered, like a pot left too long on the stove. When Ethan's back was turned, Chloe wandered toward the old barn, sketchbook pressed to her chest. Ranger padded beside her, high seers swiveling at every sound. The barn loomed like a fallen cathedral, rafters broken, beams sagging, but it still carried the echo of life. Dust floated in heavy shafts of light, and the smell of old hay lingered, sweet but stale. As Chloe stepped inside, Ranger halted, head low. A soft rustle came from the far corner of the stall. She froze, breath caught in her throat. Slowly, a small figure emerged from behind a stack of collapsed boards. A boy no older than 9. He was thin, almost fragile, with dark brown hair that hadn't seen a comb in weeks. His clothes hung loose, a faded checkered shirt, missing buttons, patched trousers, boots 2 sizes too big. His green eyes flashed like weary glass. Part suspicion, part, plea. He clutched a piece of rope in one hand, though it trembled as much as he did. Clue blinked, stunned, then whispered, "Hi." The boy said nothing, only edged back toward the shadows. But then another sound followed. The scrape of boots heavier, slower. An elderly man emerged, leaning hard on a crooked wooden cane. His name, as Chloe would soon learn, was Silas Green. He was 72, once a tall man, but now stooped with the weight of years. His beard, long and white, framed a weathered face lined deep by sun and sorrow. His eyes, blue-gray, sharp even through age, held a stubborn pride. He wore a battered leather hat that looked as though it had seen 100 trails, a frayed duster coat, and a faded bandana knotted at his throat. There was still a trace of the cowboy in his posture, though now it leaned heavy on willpower. "Caleb," Silas said, voice rough but steady. "Step back," the boy obeyed, moving closer to his grandfather's side. I'm Chloe, she whispered, holding out her sketchbook like an offering. I didn't mean to scare you. Silas eyed her carefully. And what are you doing sneaking up on folks in their own shelter? This is, our ranch now, Chloe said cautiously. My dad bought it. At that, Silas gave a dry laugh, more bitter than amused. Bought it? They sold it to you for pennies, I reckon, just like they stole it from us. Ethan had noticed Chloe's absence and worried followed her path. When he raked the barn door, he stopped short at the sight of the strangers. Ranger stood between Chloe and the boy, not hostile, but watchful, his tail low and ears tipped forward. Ethan stepped inside, shoulders squared. Who are you? Silas drew himself taller, though Thiefert made his cane tremble. Named Silas Green. This here's my grandson, Caleb. We lived on our own land till the bank decided we didn't. Forged debts, fake papers, sheriff signed us off quicker than a rustler runs with a herd. Took everything we had. We've been drifting since. When the cold came, I remembered this old dairy. Figured walls are walls, even if they creak. Ethan studied the old man, the thin boy at his side. The hollow way their clothes hung. Hunger and weariness radiated from them more honestly than words. Chloe clutched her sketchbook tighter, eyes darting between the two men, sensing the tension building. They're not bad people, she blurted. They just needed somewhere safe. The silence thickened. Silas looked Ethan over. His worn jacket, the tired weight in his stance, the girl who looked too much like her late mother. Something softened in his gaze. You've got a family to keep, Silas said, his voice low. I don't want trouble for you. If you tell us to move on, we will, but I won't drag Caleb down another frozen road tonight. Ethan's jaw tightened. The instinct to protect his daughter warred with the memory of his own losses. He wanted to say no, to demand they leave. Yet Ranger chose that moment to step forward, sniff Caleb's hand, and press his nose gently into the boy's palm. Caleb's face, lit with cautious wonder, and his fingers curled into Rares's fur. The sight twisted something in Ethan. If Ranger, unerring, loyal, never wrong about people, trusted this boy, then perhaps he should too. Still, he didn't speak. Instead, he turned, away slightly, torn between compassion and responsibility. Chloe, sensing the fragile thread, holding them all together, knelt beside Caleb. Do you like drawing? She asked. He shook his head, shy. I don't have paper. Well, I do, she said, flipping open her sketchbook. She pointed to one page. This is the house I want to build here, with flowers. Lots of them. Sunflowers, roses, maybe even apple trees. Caleb studied the page. Flowers are nice, he said softly, but if I could have anything, it'd be a room of my own, just mine with a door that shuts. His voice cracked with the weight of longing. Chloe's eyes softened. Maybe one day you'll have both. A room and a garden. They smiled at each other, two children carving hope out of ruin. Their laughter bubbled as Chloe handed him a pencil stub and told him to try. Caleb sketched clumsily, drawing a crooked box with a rectangle door. That's my room, he whispered. From the barn doorway, Ethan watched, torn. His daughter's kindness, the boy's fragile hope, and the old man's quiet dignity all pressed against his chest like an ache. Ranger lay at Caleb's feet, tail thumping gently, sealing the bond with silent approval. Ethan folded his arms, brow furrowed. He knew what letting them stay could mean trouble with whoever had forced them out, with lawmen who bent the rules, with the fragile balance of survival he was trying to build. And yet he also knew the hollowness of losing everything. He had not come here for company, but perhaps company had found him. The barn fell into a hush as the sun slid toward the horizon, painting the fields in long shadows. Chloe and Caleb leaned, close over the sketchbook, giggling at their crooked lines as if the world outside their page could not touch them. Silas lowered himself onto a bale of hay, coughing quietly, his shoulders heavy with age, but his eyes still burning with defiance. Ethan stood at the doorway, half guard, half guardian, watching his daughter laugh again for the first time in weeks. He knew he couldn't decide tonight, but he also knew that Dead Crow Ranch no longer felt empty. The following morning broke with a sky as pale as bone and a thin frost covering the grass. Ethan split wood behind the farmhouse, each swing of the axe sending sharp echoes across the valley. Chloe and Caleb sat near the porch with their sketchbooks spread across their knees, rangers stretched out at their feet. They traded pencils and ideas. Caleb drawing crooked barns, Chloe sketching flowers curling along fences. Their laughter made the abandoned ranch sound less empty. Inside the barn, Silas rested on an overturned bucket, his cane propped against his leg. His breath was shallow, but his eyes were alive as he told stories to the children. This place, he said, voice growly with age, was once the pride of Wyoming. Milk from these herds reached every corner of the state. They called it the River of White Gold. The barns rang with the sound of cattle, and the trains carried butter and cheese clear across the plains. When the disease came, it was like a war, without guns. Everything collapsed in weeks. Families broke, and the land agents moved in like vultures. The children listened as though he were reciting myth. Chloe scribbled a sketch of cows lined up in the parlor, their faces patient and kind. Caleb added trees heavy with apples. Even though no orchard had ever stood here, for them imagination was stronger than memory. Ethan leaned on the axe handle, watching from a distance. The story carried a warning. The ranch had been powerful once, and anything powerful always drew men who wanted to own it. By noon, the sound of engines broke the fragile peace. A black SUV rolled down the dirt track, followed by a dented pickup. Dust curled up like smoke behind them. Ranger sprang to his feet, hackles rising, and positioned himself in front of the children before the vehicles had even stopped. Ethan's stomach clenched. Strangers in car seldom brought good news. The SUV door opened, and a man stepped out with the confident swagger of someone who had never been refused. Victor Hale was in his early 50s, tall and broad-shouldered, dressed in a sharp gray suit that seemed absurd against the mud and frost. His dark hair was slicked back, and a gold watch gleamed at his wrist. But it was his eyes, hard, calculating, cold, that gave away his nature. They scanned the ranch, not with curiosity, but possession. Two men climbed from the pickup. One was stocky, wearing a leather jacket and jeans, his hands resting on his belt like he expected trouble. The other was thin with narrow eyes and a nervous smirk. They lingered behind Victor like shadows. Victor looked at Ethan as if sizing up prey. "So you're the man who bought this patch of dirt." His voice was smooth, but every syllable cut. $9, wasn't it? Quite the bargain. Ethan wiped his palms on his jeans and stepped forward. "It was on the county auction block. I paid fair and square." Victor chuckled, though the sound had no humor. "Fair and square," he says. "Let me educate you. This land is a liability. The county was glad to dump it, but there are strings attached. Taxes, water rights, environmental assessments. A man could drown in the paperwork before he ever milked a cow." He leaned closer, lowering his voice until it was almost intimate. "That's why men like me exist. I clean up mistakes. You want peace? Sign the deed over. Take a little cash and walk away before it swallows you." Chloe and Caleb had crept closer, their sketchbooks clutched to their chest. Silas from the barn doorway gripped his cane tight, jaw clenched. Rears's growl vibrated through the air, deep and steady, like a storm building under the earth. Ethan kept his voice calm. "This land may be broken, but it's mine. I'm not selling." Victor's smile thinned into a line. "Stubbornness is expensive, and this ranch doesn't welcome outsiders. You'll find that out." He tipped his head toward his men, who stepped forward a pace. Ranger moved instantly, teeth bared, a sound tearing from his throat that froze the air. His stance was absolute, his body a wall between the intruders and the family. The stocky man swore under his breath and stepped back. Even Victor's expression flickered, though he quickly smoothed it over. He glanced at Ranger, then back at Ethan. "Enjoy your little dream while it lasts. I'll be back, and I won't be polite next time." With that, he turned, his shoes crunching against gravel, and climbed back into the SUV. The engines roared to life, the vehicles spraying dust as they're treated down the track. The silence that followed felt heavy, broken only by Ranger's steady breathing as he lowered himself slowly, still watching the road. Chloe clutched Caleb's sleeve. "He looked like he wanted to steal everything," she whispered. "He does," Silas said bitterly, limping toward them. "Victor Hale has been circling this land for years. He feeds on what's weak, buys cheap, sells high, leaves nothing but bones. Don't mistake his suit for manners. He's a wolf dressed for Sunday." Ethan absorbed the words, fists tightening. He had wanted peace, a place for Chloe to heal, but peace had never been part of the deal. If Victor saw value here, then conflict was already brewing. To chase away the tension, Chloe held up her sketchbook. "Look," she said brightly to Caleb. "I drew cows like your grandpa described." Caleb grinned shyly, flipping his page to show the apple. "Trees," he had added. "And here, see, I made the barn new again." The two children sat side by side on the porch, coloring the ranch back to life with pencil and hope. Rangers stretched between them, eyes half closed but ears still alert. Their laughter rose again, delicate but determined, as if daring the shadow of Victor Hale to steal it. From the barn doorway, Silas began another tale, this one softer about summer nights, when the parlor lights burned late and the smell of warm milk carried all the way to the fields. Chloe's pencil raced. Caleb's hands smudged his page, and for a moment, the weight of threats and greed lifted. Ethan stood in the yard, his gaze fixed on the horizon, where the dust of Victor's car still hung. He knew the man would return. But as he looked at Chloe and Caleb sketching dreams and at Silas conjuring history, he also knew that this land carried something more powerful than money, memory, hope, and the stubborn will to endure. And Victor Hale, for all his polished cruelty, had no claim on that. The wind carried a restless whisper across Dead Crow Ranch's dusk, faded in tonight. Ethan sat at the small wooden table in the farmhouse, his rough hands wrapped around a tin, mug of coffee gone cold. Silas sat across from him, shoulders slumped, his cane leaning within reach. The old man had been quiet all evening, his blue-gray eyes fixed on the floor as if remembering something heavy. Chloe and Caleb lay sprawled on the rug nearby, sketching with shared pencils. Ranger stretched out beside them, his head resting protectively across Caleb's knee. At length Silas spoke. His voice was low, steady, but threaded with urgency. "This land has more than barns and broken fences. Underneath it runs a vein of life. The old aquifer, the original owners tapped it with pipes and tunnels. That water fed. The cattle greened the pastures. Whole towns further downriver lived on it. Whoever controls it doesn't just own this ranch. They own the valley." Ethan looked up sharply. "And Victor Hale knows it." Silas nodded grimly. "That's why he's circling. Theodices killed the herds, but it didn't kill the water. It's still there, buried and waiting. They left maps once, old schematics of the lines. I've seen them years ago. The entrance to the main pump. House was sealed when the place was condemned, but if you find it, you'll understand why Hale wants you gone." The children had stopped drawing, their eyes wide. Caleb whispered, "A secret river under our feet." Chloe hugged her sketchbook to her chest. "Maybe it's still ours to keep safe." Ethan's jaw tightened. "If it's there, we'll find it." That night, Chloe's dreams came alive with a warmth both painful and sweet. She stood in a field bursting with wild flowers, sunlight spilling like honey across the sky. Her mother's figure emerged not in sharp detail, but in the soft way memory preserves what matters most. Nora's voice was gentle, almost a song. "Protect what is yours, Chloe. What belongs to you must never be given away." Chloe reached for her mother's hand, but the flowers shifted into water, rising around her ankles, clear and cold. She woke with a start, heart racing, Rare's steady breath close by. She whispered into the dark, "I'll protect it, Mama. I promise." The following morning, Ethan gathered them outside the barn with tools, a crowbar, spades, a lantern, and rope. Ranger trotted, ahead, already alert, nose working the air. Silas walked slower, leaning heavily on his cane but refusing to be left behind. Caleb carried a battered flashlight, its beam weak but determined. "Where do we even start?" Ethan muttered. Silas pointed toward the north field. "The pump house used to be out there, built against the slope. Time and storms buried it. But the dog will know. Trust him." They moved through the overgrown pasture, weeds up to their knees. Ranger ranged wide, sniffing, pausing, circling back, then striking forward again with purpose. His tail was stiff, ear-twitching. He stopped suddenly at a rise of earth where thistles grew thick. He barked once, sharp and certain, then began pawing furiously at the ground. "Good boy," Ethan said, kneeling to brush aside weeds. Beneath the roots, his fingers struck something hard, stone squared and set with iron. Caleb aimed the flashlight. The beam revealed the edge of an old wooden hatch, nearly swallowed by dirt in time. Clue gasped, "It's real!" Together, Ethan and Silas pried at the hatch. The wood groaned, resisting, then gave way with a splintering crack. Dust billowed into the morning air, a yawning darkness stretched below, the scent of old water rising like a ghost. Lantern light revealed a narrow stair carved into earth descending into silence. Ethan tested the first step, steadying the lantern. Ranger pressed close to his side, muscles taut. "Stay behind me," Ethan warned. The stairwell led to a low tunnel lined with bricks, damp and cool. Pipes, corroded but still intact, ran along the walls, vanishing into shadow. The air smelled of rust, limestone, and something faintly sweet, the breath of buried water. Caleb whispered, "Odd. It's like a secret cave." They followed the tunnel until it opened into a small chamber. Rusted tools lay scattered, and on the wall hung a cracked board with papers pinned beneath glass. Ethan brushed away grime. What remained was the faded outline of a map, schematics of the ranch's underground irrigation, though yellowed and curling. The lines were clear enough. The aquifer ran directly beneath Dead Crow Ranch, branching out like veins into the valley. Silas let out a breath like surrender. There it is. Proof. If Haley's hands on this, he'll own more than land. He'll choke every farm for miles. Chloe pressed close to the map, her small fingers trembling as if holding treasure. "Then we can't let him take it." Ethan folded the map carefully into his jacket, his mind already racing. Knowledge was power, but it was also danger. He looked at Silas, whose eyes burned with both pride and regret. The old man had carried this secret too long. Ranger sniffed the air, his body suddenly tense again. He growled low, glancing back toward the stairwell as if warning them that time was running thin. Ethan tightened his grip on the lantern. They weren't safe here. Not yet. When they emerged back into daylight, the valley stretched before them in quiet innocence. To anyone passing by, it looked like nothing but grass and ruin. But now Ethan knew the truth. Beneath the soil lay the heart of the land, and the battle for Dead Crow Ranch had only just begun. Chloe clutched her sketchbook close, her mind still filled with her mother's voice. Caleb's eyes gleamed with the thrill of discovery, though fear lingered at the edges. Silas stood with his cane planted firmly, shoulders squared as though the years had lifted off him. Ranger sat upright at Ethan's side, eyes fixed on the horizon, guarding secrets no one else could see. For the first time since setting foot on this land, Ethan felt the full weight of what he had inherited. Not just $9 worth of abandoned buildings, but a responsibility as vast as the water hidden below. The night fell too quickly on Dead Crow Ranch. A bruised sky bled into black, and the wind carried the sharp scent of oncoming storm. Ethan had just finished checking the windows of the farmhouse when Rare's low growl pulled him to the porch. The dog's amber rays cut toward the silhouette of the old storage barn across the yard. Something was wrong. Then the flames leapt. Orange light burst through the rotting boards, licking upward as if hungry for the stars. Within moments, the barn became a lantern of fire, the dry timber feeding the blaze with a savage crackle. Chloe screamed from the doorway, Caleb's voice echoing in panic. Ethan's blood froze when he realized Caleb wasn't beside her. The boy's small shadow flickered inside the inferno, trapped, cut off by walls of flame. "Caleb!" Ethan roared, sprinting across the yard. The heat hit him like a wall, searing his face. He tried the door, but it collapsed inward, fire biting at his boots. Ranger didn't hesitate. With a bark sharp as steel, the German shepherd plunged into the barn through a gap in the boards. Ethan shouted after him, but the dog was already gone, swallowed by fire and smoke. Inside, Caleb coughed violently, his voice breaking through the roar. RER's body was a shadow against the flames. Low and determined, he found Caleb cornered near, a pile of burning hay bales, teeth clamped onto the boy's sleeve. Ranger dragged him clear, pulling with a strength born of pure loyalty. Caleb stumbled, eyes wide with terror, clinging to the dog's thick fur as they pushed through the smoke. Ethan, choking, spotted them at last through the shifting haze. He grabbed Caleb in his arms as Ranger staggered free, his front leg trailing. Oddly, blood stained the fur near his paw, a cruel red against sable and gold. Silashad dragged buckets from the well, his old arms straining as he sloshed water against the blaze. Ethan seized another bucket, both men working in frantic rhythm. Chloe, though terrified, ran back and forth with smaller pails, her braid whipping. Against her shoulder, her cheeks stree with soot. The fire hissed and snarled, but slowly began to shrink under their desperate assault. The barn was lost. The roof collapsed with a terrible groan, but they managed to keep the flames from spreading to the fields or farmhouse. At last, the fire dwindled to smoking embers, the night sky streak with its fading fury. Ethan collapsed, toon knee, clutching Caleb against him. The boy sobbed into his shoulder, shaken but alive. Ranger lay on the dirt nearby, panning hard, his paw bleeding where shards of timber had cut deep. Chloe knelt beside him, tears dripping onto the dog's muzzle. "You saved him," she whispered. "You're our hero." Ranger thumped his tail once, eyes half-lidded as if agreeing quietly. The sound of horses and engines broke the silence. Lanterns bobbed along the road, and soon figures emerged from the dark. Leading them was Angela Brooks, a woman of 40 with strong, weather-worn features. Her auburn hair, streaked with gray, was tied back in a simple braid. She wore patched overalls over a faded plaid shirt, her boots caked with mud. Widowed for 5 years, she carried herself with a hard practicality, but her eyes softened as she took in the devastation. Behind her came several families, men with sun-brown arms, women clutching children, faces drawn with the same exhaustion and bitterness Ethan had come to recognize. Angela stepped forward, lantern light catching the determination in her gaze. "We heard there was trouble. Then we saw the flames. And when folks see fire at Dead Crow Ranch, they know who set the match." Ethan's shoulders sagged. He wanted to deny it, but there was no point. Victor Hale. Angela's jaw tightened. "He's bled us all. Took my husband's land after he died of fever. Said the loan was unpaid. though I never saw a cent borrowed. I've kept to myself since, just trying to raise my son. But this, she gestured at the smoking ruin, at Caleb trembling in Ethan's arms, at Ranger bleeding into the dirt. This is cruelty, and I'll stand against it. One by one, the others nodded. A man with a crooked hat spoke up. He forged my father's signature. Another, thin and tired, added, "He used the sheriff to throw us off our farm." The air thickened with stories, pain-braided, into anger. Ethan looked around at them, seeing for the first time not scattered victims, but potential allies. His gaze dropped to Ranger, who shifted, wincing at his injured paw, but still watching the newcomers with steady eyes. The dog had risked everything for Caleb. Perhaps this community could do the same for each other. Silas leaned heavily on his cane, his voice carrying like a cracked bell. "You see now, don't you? One family alone can't fight a man like Hale. But together, we're stronger. This ranch, this land, it could be the place where we draw the line." Chloe and Caleb sat side by side on the porch steps, soot streaking their faces, sketchbooks forgotten at their feet. Chloe slipped her hand into Caleb's, a silent bond forming between them. Caleb looked at Ranger, then at Ethan, and whispered, "He didn't let me die. Maybe none of us have to if we stand together." Ethan rose slowly, his body aching but his eyes resolute. He had come here seeking solitude, a place to bury his past. Instead, fire had revealed something else, a purpose, and the fragile beginnings of a community no longer willing to be silent. The night smelled of ash and smoke, but beneath it stirred the faintest breath of hope. The smoldering ruins of the barn were still fresh in Ethan's memory when Silas told him of a young woman who might be the key to exposing Victor Hale. Her name was Grace Monroe, a lawyer born in the valley but long absent, who had returned after years in the city. She had a reputation for refusing compromise and a voice that carried both conviction and calm. 2 days later, Ethan met her at a dusty diner on the edge of town. Grace was in her early 30s, tall and sharp-featured, her auburn hair tied back in a loose knot. She wore a plain navy jacket over a white blouse, her boots scuffed from travel, but her green eyes burned with a clarity that made her seem unshakable. When she shook Ethan's hand, her grip was firm, her tone brisk. "I know what Hale's done," she said without preamble. "I just never had enough evidence. But if what Silas tells me is true, that you found the old maps and records beneath the ranch, then this case is more than personal. It's systemic fraud. It could bring him down." Ethan slid the folded documents across the table. "These were buried for years. If he gets them back, it's over for us." Grace studied the papers, her brow furrowing, as she traced the forged signatures. "This handwriting, it's uniform, mechanical. No real farmer signs like this. It's ironclad. We'll prepare for court, but know this. Hale won't fight fair. He'll use intimidation first." Ethan nodded. "Then he'll find we're not as easy to scare as he thinks." The next weekend brought the annual harvest fair in town, a modest event of food stalls, rides cobbled together by local hands, and music played on fiddles and guitars. Chloe and Caleb had begged to go, and Ethan, reluctant at first, agreed. He wanted them to remember they were children, not just survivors of fire and fear. The fair smelled of caramel apples and roasted corn. Lanterns swayed in the breeze, and laughter rippled through the air. Chloe, wearing her red cap, darted to the carousel, her eyes glowing as she clutched the painted pole of a wooden horse. Caleb, shy but grinning, joined her, Ranger pacing the edge of the ride like a watchful guardian. For the first time, Chloe laughed without shadow. Caleb tried cotton candy, his face smeared with pink sugar, and held Chloe's hand as they wandered through the rows of stalls. They paused at a pen of prized calves, sketchbooks in hand, scribbling their own versions of the wide-eyed animals. Their joy was a fragile song, but it hummed steady, defiant against all that threatened them. While the children played, Ethan and Grace prepared in the town hall across the street. Grace spread the forged loan contracts across a wooden table, her voice crisp as she rehearsed her arguments. Ethan paced, uneasy, his instincts coiled tight. Then the sound of engines arrived like a warning. Victor Hale rolled into town with 3 trucks, men spilling out behind him, broad-shouldered, grim, their eyes flat with loyalty, bought in cash. Victor himself wore another immaculate suit, but his smirk carried the poison of arrogance. He entered, the Hallen invited, his shoes clicking on the worn floorboards. "So this is where the dreamers gather," he drawled, plotting with old paper and false hope. His eyes cut to Ethan. "You should have taken my offer. Now you're dragging your daughter into a fight she can't win." Ranger was already moving. The dog stepped forward, body stiff, ears pinned back, a growl rumbling like thunder. He planted himself squarely between Victor's men and Ethan, his amber eyes blazing. The thugs hesitated. None dared step closer. Rares's teeth gleamed sharp under the hall's weak lights. Victor sneered, but his glance flickered uneasily toward the dog. "You think a mutt can stop progress?" Grace stood, her voice firm. "He's not a mutt. He's a witness's protector, and soon Adjury will see what you are. A thief dressed like a gentleman." Victor's smile thinned, his facade cracking for the briefest moment. He snapped his fingers, and his men retreated reluctantly. "Enjoy your fare. It'll be your last." He stalked out, the echo of his departure leaving the room colder than before. Outside, Chloe and Caleb skipped toward Ethan, holding small paper bags of sweets, their faces lit with innocence. They had no idea how close darkness had come. Ethan bent to them, one hand brushing Chloe's hair, the other resting on Rares's back. He looked up at Grace, who watched the children with a softness in her eyes. "They deserve better than this fight," Ethan murmured. Grace replied, steady as stone. "Then we win for them." The courthouse in Riverton was not a grand building, just a block of pale stone with tall windows and a single brass clock above the doors. But on that morning, it felt like the center of the world. Farmers, widows, children, and laborers packed the benches, their faces taut with hope and fear. They were the families who had lost everything to forged debts and false claims. Today, they wanted more than a verdict. They wanted their lives back. Grace Monroe stood at the front of the courtroom, her navy jacket pressed, her hair tied neatly, her eyes blazing with focus. She spoke with calm precision, each word landing like a hammer on steel. Before her lay the stack of evidence, maps, contracts, and ledgers Ethan had unearthed with Silas. Pages blackened by age now glowed with truth. Ethan sat behind her, his broad shoulders tense. He wasn't a man of speeches, but his quiet presence carried weight. His callous hands rested on Chloe's small sketchbook. She had insisted he bring it, as if the drawings of gardens and cows might remind him why they fought. Victor Hale strode into the courtroom with his usual arrogance, his gray suit immaculate, his hair slicked back, his gold watch flashing. But there was no swagger in his eyes today, only a sharp edge of calculation. He still believed money could shield him. Heisman, Collins, and Rafe, the heavy-set enforcers, sat stiffly beside him, their smirks long gone. Judge Harland was a stern man in his 60s with iron gray hair and a reputation for blunt fairness. His black robe swept the floor as he entered, and the room fell silent. "This court is now in session." Grace rose first, her voice carried across the courtroom. "Your Honor, the case before you is not just about one ranch. It is about years of fraud committed by Victor Hale and his associates, aided by a complicit bank. Families were stripped of their land through forged signatures, false loans, and threats of violence. Here in these documents lies proof of their crimes." She held up the contracts. Names of widows and dead men were signed in a script too neat to be genuine. She laid out the ledgers, each page a trail of theft, and then she presented testimony, statements from Angela Brooks and others who had lost their farms. Their voices shook, but their words struck like lightning. Victor's lawyer tried to dismiss it as coincidence, to call the families careless with debts, but Grace's rebuttals cut through every excuse. Coincidence does not forge 20 signatures in the same hand. Carelessness does not set fire to barns with children inside. This was not accident. This was predation. Ethan was called to the stand. He spoke plainly, describing the night he found the hidden records, the fire that nearly claimed Caleb, and how Ranger had dragged the boy to safety. His voice cracked only once. When he admitted that for a moment, he thought he would lose them both. The courtroom sat frozen in silence, even Victor's, men staring at the floor. Finally, Silas hobbled forward with his cane, his frame trembling, but his voice steady. I am 72 years old. I was raised on land like this, worked it with my hands until they bled. When my wife died, all I had left was my grandson. And Victor Hale took even that, forging papers, sending us to sleep in barns like animals. I say this not for pity, but for truth. The land was never his to take. The old man's words cracked something in the room. Even the judge's stern face softened. When the jury returned after hours of deliberation, the hush was electric. On the charges of financial fraud, arson, and conspiracy, the foreman read, "We find the defendant, Victor Hale, guilty." A ripple of sound spread through the benches. The foreman continued, "We recommend a sentence of 20 years imprisonment. His associates, Collins and Rafe, are guilty of aiding and intimidation. Sentences 10 years and 5 years. Judge Harlan's gavel fell. So ordered. Furthermore, Clearwater Bank Isto be dissolved under state authority. Lands taken under fraudulent pretenses will be restored to their rightful owners." The courtroom erupted. Families wept openly. Angela Brooks pressed her hands to her face, tears streaking down her cheeks. Caleb gripped Chloe's hand, whispering, "We did it!" Ranger barked once, sharp and triumphant, as though he understood. Victor Hale was let out in handcuffs, his suit wrinkled, his eyes hollow. He did not look at anyone. For the first time, the predator had no teeth. Weeks later, the valley gathered again, but this time not in court. At Dead Crow Ranch, now freshly painted and alive with the sound of hammers. The people held a day of rebuilding. Stalls lined the field, tables heavy with food. The air rang with fiddles and laughter. A new sign had been raised above the gate. New Hope Ranch. Children chased each other through the grass. Chloe and Caleb leading the charge, their sketchbooks now filled with visions slowly becoming real. Silas sat on the porch in a rocking chair, his canna resting across his knees, a smile hidden in his beard. For the first time in years, his eyes reflected peace. Ranger limped slightly from his injured leg, the fur still scarred, but he carried himself with the pride of a soldier. Wherever he went, children crowded around, petting him, calling him their hero. He accepted it with quiet dignity, amber eyes soft with contentment. Ethan stood at the edge of the yard, watching. For the first time in years, the weight had lifted from his chest. $9 had bought him more than a piece of land. It had bought him a family, one made not only of blood, but of bonds forged through fire, courage, and hope. The sun slid low, setting the valley ablaze with gold. And as laughter rang across the fields, Ethan whispered to himself, "We're home." In every struggle, there is a hidden miracle waiting to be revealed. Sometimes it comes not through grand signs, but through courage, loyalty, and the quiet faith that God has planted within us. Just as Ethan, Chloe, Caleb, and Ranger found anew, beginning at New Hope Ranch, so too can each of us discover that God's grace can turn a shiz into life, fear into strength, and loneliness into family. May this story remind you that no matter how heavy the trials, God still works in mysterious and loving ways in our daily lives. If their journey touched your heart, we invite you to share this story. Leave your thoughts in the comments and subscribe to our channel so these messages of hope may continue to reach others. May God bless you and your loved ones with peace, strength, and the unshakable promise of a brighter,